Tas nav par to, ka cilvēki tic vai netic meliem. Tas ir par to, kā informācijas vide, kurā mēs visi dzīvojam, un tas saturs, ko mēs patērējam, kā mums nezinot, šis te var tikt manipulēts, lai novestu mūs pie viedokļu maiņas, lai novestu mūs pieņemt vai nepieņemt attiecīgus lēmumus, vai tas ir jautājums par vakcināciju, vai tas ir jautājums vēlēšanu kontekstā, par kuru partiju mēs balsosim vai nebalsosim, kuri politiķi mums patīk vai nepatīk. Ja? Un līdz ar to man dezinformācija nav komunikācijas jautājums, man dezinformācija ir drošības jautājums, tas ir sabiedrības saliedētības jautājums, tas ir jautājums par sociālo konstruktu starp valdību un iedzīvotājiem, un tāpēc mēs par šo te domājam kā par drošības izaicinājumu. Nevis kā tīra komunikācija.
Today we are in the #Disinfo 2024 conference in Rīgā, Latvia, where we are having different speakers, different experts talking on disinformation, regulation, from the platform side, from the non-governmental side, from the government side. We have a lot of private sector people here. So we want to use this opportunity also to give a chance to our people watching Melns Balta podcast or listening it on Spotify to see some insights from some of the brightest minds I've had a chance to talk with over these 2 days. So together with me today we have Klēra Atkina, CEO of Check My Ads enterprise. So Klēra, nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
You like Rīgā so far?
I love Rīgā.
Great. So my first question to you is, we've been discussing disinformation for 2 days already from different angles. It's a very wide concept. What would be the one thing in your mind that comes to your mind that everyone should be talking more, or that everyone should be knowing is not talking enough lately of disinformation and how it relates also with the work you're doing?
The one thing that is so important to remember is that politicians will always have a political incentive to spread disinformation or fear or hate about groups for their own political advantage. There are certain types of politicians who traffic in certain narratives. But what we see thanks to the internet is that around every politician globally spreading those things, there is a donut of grifters who are making a lot of money on advertising, spreading those same narratives. And we can do something about that.
So what are you doing? What's your role in this? And what role you see for, there are different stakeholders involved in this. There are governments involved in this. There are non-governmental sector, private sector, individual citizens. So what's your role and your enterprise's role in this?
So Check My Ads is a charity, a nonprofit, dedicated to cleaning up what we call the supply chain of digital advertising. So we are the ad tech watchdog, the digital advertising watchdog, and we see the internet not as an information superhighway, but as a financial market. And this is revelatory because the way that we see the internet will inform the way that we fix it. So when I speak to groups of any size, the number one thing that I tell them is that advertisers do not have control over where their ads go. It's always surprising to folks. You'd think that these large multinational corporations would have control over where their ads go and would be able to see where their ads have been.
But they don't.
But they don't. And that's the biggest problem in the internet today, because what this has built up over time, over the last couple decades, is a financial system that is inadvertently funding all kinds of things that advertisers have no intention of funding or sponsoring with their ads. What this means is that there are middlemen. And the middlemen of this industry are totally out of control. They have seized control from the advertisers. They have seized control from news publishers, certainly. And they are making a lot of money creating all this chaos.
And we've been talking a lot about AI. This conference, other conferences, I guess there is a conference every day somewhere on AI these days. How you see this as is it a fixer, or does it make the problems worse than they are now?
The thing about AI is that it moves towards a system of less transparency, not more transparency. So we are seeing currently on the internet today that AI is affecting the content of ads. It is also affecting the content of websites, where the ads go. And AI is being used now to choose where the ads go, to traffic control all the ads and the money and the data. And when you don't have transparency into any of those three things, then we end up with a world that is more chaotic, not less. So to combat these ills, we have to treat the industry, the ad tech industry, as a financial market. And we have to say it's not fair that advertisers don't have transparency into where their ads go. It's not fair that advertisers don't even know what the middlemen are who are touching their campaigns before they get to the website. Okay, there are thousands of middlemen. And it's not fair that they do not get refunds when their ads go to places where they don't want them to go. So those are the kinds of things that we need to work on, especially because of AI.
And how does it work in practice? Maybe is it educating, or is it a database thing, or is it providing tools to provide more transparency? How do we achieve that transparency and awareness raising?
When the financial market globally went real haywire in the 20s, we built the SEC, the Securities and Exchanges Commission in the United States. When we had the financial crisis in 2008, we built a legal identifier agency so that we could identify legal entities globally. We need to know what's in the supply chain, who the middlemen are. And we can do that. We have the tools to do that if we treat this industry as a financial market.
I see your point. Thank you, Klēra. Thank you. Last thing I'd like to ask you is about Riga. I mean, you've been spending already at least second day, if not more, here. What's your take on Riga and Latvia so far? What's your impression?
Well, they call it the Paris of this region, and I love it so much because it's got fantastic food. The people are lovely. The architecture is stunning. The weather has been beautiful. I'm very grateful for all of it.
Thank you for being on this podcast. Thanks for this conversation, and I wish you a great rest of the conference. #Disinfo 2024.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Today with me, I have a pleasure to talk with Carl Miller, who is a representative of Demos, a think tank in the United Kingdom. Hi, Carl. It's great to have you.
Yeah, it's great to be here. And thanks so much for having not just me, but the 499 other people that have descended on Riga, to talk about all of this.
One question I'm asking to all people I'm meeting here at the conference is about disinformation. I mean, the whole conference is called disinformation at the end of the day. And how do you understand this concept? Is it the right concept to talk about? And what's the one thing everyone should be probably talking more about disinformation?
I do not, I'll be honest with you, I do not love the word disinformation. I do not think it is at all the right description of what we're actually trying to confront here. So the problem is that disinformation creates this idea that what we really have to do is fight the lies. And that the way that Russia and other autocratic countries influence us is simply through lying to us. But actually, I pull apart these kind of campaigns for a living. That's what I do day in, day out. And what we actually see is that shadow influence works in lots of other ways. Like quite often, these campaigns just confirm your worldview. They flatter your beliefs. They're not lying to you to get you to change your mind. They're going to tell you whatever you think is right and then try and harness that and take that in a different direction. But very often, we see actually shadow influence not really having much to do with lies. It has more to do with masculinity or femininity, or trying to change people's ideas of patriotism, or changing their ideas of who's their friends, or whether their in or out group is under attack. That's how shadow influence often flows. And until we really recognise that, we're kind of, I think, actually trapped by the word disinformation. Because, what it does when we look to solutions is it forces you to try and find some kind of general response to lies on the internet. And that's never going to be possible.
And what's more appropriate than shadow influence? Is that what you're proposing?
Of course, like the thing about disinformation, it's pithy. It's one word. It rolls off the tongue. That's why it's become the kind of branding, I suppose, to encapsulate this kind of problem set. I think, and it's less catchy, I think a better way of describing it is illicit influence operations. And that brings me actually on to the other kind of emphasis that I think we need to put on this, is that what's really happening, the information maneuver, so to speak, that is genuinely and seriously trying to undercut our democratic way of life, are professional orchestrated campaigns. They're staffed by people that do that day in, day out. They have companies, they have money, they have financial transfers, they buy satellite TV stations, they set up social media groups. They're tangible things. They're not lies whistling around the internet. They are orchestrated and concrete undertakings. And the more that we recognize that, the more I think we can kind of pivot away from just trying to stop all the lies flowing on the internet and more work out how we can actually disrupt those specific campaigns.
And as I said in my initial remarks, we have different people from different backgrounds at the conference, yourself being from non-governmental sector. I mean, how do you see a division of labor between different stakeholders in solving these issues of foreign influence operations, campaigns, whatever we call them at the end of the day? But the problem is out there. I think everyone can see it. Mm-hmm. How do you see the division of labor? What's the role for... I mean, there's a lot of role for governments and international institutions, but what's the role for in your case for non-governmental sector? And maybe you can give us an example of what you're doing in this regard.
It's a great question, and like kind of all of society responses have become very much in vogue given this. Everyone's talking about this. Now, I actually wrote a paper for this conference in the run-up to it where I try and lay out an answer to that very question. So in my mind, we can view these operations as basically like a chain of things. Like for anyone listening to this in cybersecurity, you'd understand it's a kill chain. Now we can cut up that chain. We can prevent them having the assets. We can stop them capturing audiences. We can prevent them raising money. We can actually kind of degrade and deny them the things that they need in order to actually continue to operate successfully influence operations.
But can we actually deny it entirely, or can we just make it more expensive, more difficult for them?
Well, but this is where all the different bits of society take different parts of that problem and different ways of cutting up that chain. So government, I think we need to have much more state power in play than we have. I would love to see more sanctions. I think in some cases, there's a clear moral case for cyber offensive operations. I think in some cases that we need to look at like commercial interventions, especially when these companies are selling these things openly, within our marketplaces. They shouldn't be allowed to do that. Denial probably looks like denial of payment systems, denial of the use of, the Western tech stack, really, operating systems, app stores. And then you asked, how do non-governmental organizations fit in? Like we've probably been doing this for some of the longest. I know the Baltics have been well aware of this problem for much longer than actually anyone else. We typically are good at kind of continuing to develop the method and build the technology to spot and track these things. So the civic societal space, think tanks, startups, they're very good, they're very innovative, they're very energetic. So they'll continue to kind of build the ways of tracking all of this as long as we can get the data. But then we typically, when we're responding, we'll be working with journalists and trying to expose the activities. But we actually don't have anything like, I think, the powers that the government has that can really start to levy costs on influence operations.
And the question is about, of course, AI. I mean, it pops to our minds every panel, every discussion, every coffee break, wherever we meet new or old people. How do you see AI? More of a risk, more of an opportunity in this kind of tactic you propose of creating kill chains?
So, I mean, we've been using AI for 15 years to spot these things. I mean, I come from a research group almost entirely composed of AI engineers. There's no way that we can do the work that we do without AI. So, every time new technology emerges, it's being used in both the defender and the attacker methodologies. That's really clear, and that's not going to change. In terms of how it's going to change the game for the opponent, I actually differ, I think, from the way that most people think about this. I think most people think that deep fakes are going to flood the internet, and I'm sure that's true. I don't know how convincing that's going to be to most people. I think people's trust in images they see is going to fall off a cliff very quickly. I'm more scared of the use of AI to kind of weaponize friendship. So say if I really want to influence an audience, what I would do, hope I'm not giving anyone ideas listening to this, what I would do is I would bring everyone into like a one-on-one bilateral conversation the last weeks or months, finding you and wherever you are online, whatever activist group or hobby group you're in, and those, that person would always be friendly, would always commiserate with you, be supportive, celebrate your victories. And over time, I think for some people that would come to look like a friendship. Now the kicker is that once you've established that as a vector, you can just simply start subtly introducing ideas, articles, evidence.
It's a very manipulative friendship, isn't it?
Extremely manipulative. Well, and here we go. Using AI, probably some version of a therapy bot, I can scale that now. So for most of the time in these conversations, you can use a generative model to have that conversation with a person.
Thank you, Klēra. The one last question is Riga. I don't know if it's your first time or not, but...
It is. It's my first time in the Baltic.
What do you think about Riga and Latvia?
I love it. I love Latvia. I've always wanted, I'm sure everyone says this, I genuinely have always wanted to visit Latvia. It's always been on the bucket list, so to speak, and just walking around the beautiful streets of the old town. It's just it's quite surreal to be here, and I'm definitely going to walk around again before I have to get back on a flight.
It's so great to have you here at the conference, to pick your brain here at the podcast, and I wish you a great rest of the day.
Thank you, and thanks so much again for having us and for having me on.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's start by introducing yourself. Can you please state your name and surname and your full position?
My name is Melisa Fleminga, and I am the United Nations Under-Secretary General for Global Communications.
Thank you. So, Melisa, today we have gathered at the #dezinfo24 conference, which is happening in Riga, Latvia, from 9 to 10th of October. It's focusing a lot of different angles on disinformation. We have people from the fact-checking community, we have international institutions, we have governmental institutions, private sector. But I'd like to ask you a question. What's the one thing in the area of disinformation that you think everyone is not talking enough, or what everyone should know probably more?
Well, I think that it affects all of our lives, and this is disinformation as opposed to misinformation, the deliberate seeding of narratives that are designed to deceive or manipulate. And we're seeing it across all dimensions in the realm of peace and security, but also around climate change. We're finding it is polarizing societies. And mostly what is an effect that most people don't really think about is that the information ecosystem is fueling distrust. And if you don't have trust in a society, if you don't have trust in your institutions, in your leaders, in the guidance that your public health institutions are giving, then you have a polarized, divided society. And what we work for, the United Nations, are societies that are peaceful, that are prosperous, that are equal, and where people can live in dignity and on a healthy planet. And we're really finding that we need healthy information ecosystems to make that kind of progress.
Great, because this podcast is being listened and watched by a lot of young audiences who are really into climate change. They're looking at different lens than probably older generations. So it's good to mention climate change, because I'd add to this also vaccine hesitancy, right?
Yes. Well, climate, it's one of the most disturbing things that we're seeing is the amount of disinformation around climate change. Even really dramatic weather events like the hurricanes that we've seen in the south of the United States, the disinformation around these hurricanes are really, really disturbing. But mostly what's disturbing is that people who link them to climate change, which is absolutely obvious, are being attacked online. So it is even the weather people who are making that scientific link. And this is, it's upending people's trust in why we are having to change our policies really quickly to address climate change, why people should come on board with the adaptation away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. We need people to trust the science, we need people to trust the information and the policies, and this kind of disinformation is really upending that.
And how would you define the division of labor between what the role for individuals, for the states or governments, and for international institutions or non-governmental sector? And how do you see in all that kind of division of labor your institutions, United Nations work?
Yeah, well, this is why we decided not to focus on disinformation as the only thing that we work on per se. We are instead focusing on information integrity. And that means that we're working on a whole of society approach to a healthy information ecosystem where trusted information, authoritative content is elevated and not lies and hate, which the algorithm in most social media platforms favors. So people having access to reliable information, people able to express themselves without being attacked, and an environment that is where hate speech is really relegated to the fringes. It's very difficult to ban things, but so what we're saying, we call on governments, first of all, don't be disinformers, but also promote and support free and independent media. That's a really critical pillar of our society. We call on platforms to to introduce safety by design and not have their algorithms favor content that enrages just because it engages, right? We ask for more moderation in countries that don't have it, among other things. We call on advertisers and PR companies not to become part of the problem. I mean, don't advertise with fossil fuel companies, for example, or also demand that your brands do not appear next to disinformation sites. And many of them have no idea that they are actually monetizing disinformation. They need to demand a stop to that, and platforms can do their thing there too. And then, there is a lot that governments can do, but also users can demand to kind of take back their ownership, first of all, of their own data, and also of their rights in terms of not being surveilled, not having their data sold to advertisers, and everything that they do, everything that they think, everything that they dream of is actually being sold.
Is there a current project or flagship campaign you maybe have been working lately that's countering disinformation or misinformation in any way you would like to?
Yeah, we have a campaign called Verified. We launched it during COVID, and we've now switched it to climate, but it is actually a kind of communication strategy infrastructure that we've developed, which is first of all, on one hand, to monitor disinformation narratives, to really understand what is circulating out there, where, and then to design content that doesn't fact check or counter, but actually serves as an alternative, and is also in those spaces. So we produce content at scale. We use our offices all over the world to take that content, develop it in local languages, find media partners, and finally we work with influencers around the world who are either already quite prominent on social media, not celebrities, but ordinary people who have quite a following.
Opinion leaders.
Opinion leaders who are care about social causes, in this case, climate change, and we empower them with information, with content, with facts, and let them create. We don't dictate, but we let them create, and they're quite excited about that. And we work with the social media platforms if they want to help boost this kind of content. It's up to them. So it's a tried and tested, impactful playbook, and it is working for us. One thing that we found when we've been doing it, that we have so many people who want to volunteer to be part of the distributors of good information, like kind of digital first responders, that we don't have the capacity to manage them. So, but I think the message there is there are more people who want to be part of a good and healthy information landscape than those who are trying to make it toxic.
Great. We'll make sure to drop the link to the campaign in the comment section on all platforms. The last question, very briefly, is AI. Of course, it's a big question, discussed a lot during these days at the conference in Riga. Opportunity or risk? On which side would you be leaning more?
Well, there are a lot of parts of the UN system that are very excited about the potential for AI. These are the health workers, for example, at WHO, or the International Telecommunications Union that's been working to connect people around the world, and those who are really trying to boost education for everybody. So those who are trying to promote equality in all kinds of sectors believe that AI has huge potential because people will be able, it will equalize the access to information. And really critical information to save lives or to provide education where it's too expensive to access now. That said, I work in communications and I work on information integrity. We are really worried about the dark side. We're already seeing how AI is being weaponized by disinformation actors. It's a cheap tool to produce content at scale, to target even more effectively, and to create also deceptive content that is really difficult for the end user to discern whether it is real or whether it is not real. So this whole trust element that we're so concerned about is really becoming worse because people are not able, even if they do have a lot of skills, even trained journalists, to figure out if a photo or an image is actually real or if it isn't. So we're calling on AI actors to really step up to make sure AI images are watermarked, also the platforms to work on this, also live up to their own design standards on the platforms and not allow AI images, deepfake images, images that are deepfake pornography, which is really being directed at women leaders and girls and upending their lives. This should not be allowed to proliferate. So we're concerned. It's happening really fast. On the encouraging side, when social media came onto the scene, I think it took more than a decade for anyone to begin thinking of we need to have some
boundaries,
some guardrails. I think legislators and governments are working on, especially here in the EU with the AI Act. So there's hope that there will be guardrails for AI. There's a lot of promise, but I think we all need to be learning as much as we can about AI, protecting ourselves from the dangers.
Thanks so much, Melisa, for joining us at the podcast, Black and White, Melns balta, and for joining the conference, of course, #Dezinfo2024. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Man ir tas gods sarunāties ar vienu no runātājiem, vienu no dalībniekiem konferences, Uldi Elksnīti, kurš ir no Latvijas, karjeru veidojas Latvijas ārlietu ministrijā, bet šobrīd strādā Briselē, Beļģijā, Eiropas Ārējās darbības dienestā ar dezinformācijas atspēkošanu un ikdienā monitorēšanu un identificēšanu. Sveiks, Uldi!
Sveiks, Rihard!
Pirmais jautājums man klasisks ir, dezinformācija ir ļoti plašs jēdziens, ļoti dažādi interpretējams. Katrs no mums iespējams to saprot dažādi. Kāda ir tava tā dezinformācijas definīcija, izpratne un vispār vai termins dezinformācija ir, vai tas joprojām aktuāls vai kaut kas cits būtu jālieto?
Es domāju, termins dezinformācijas, sākšu no beigām, termins dezinformācijas, domāju, joprojām ir aktuāls. Un teiksim, varbūt šīs konferences laikā ļoti daudz, kā minēja, profesionāli cilvēki, kam ir svarīgi daudz precīzākas definīcijas. Es domāju, priekš cilvēkiem, lai dotu saprotamu vārdu kompleksai problēmai. Es domāju, ka dezinformācija joprojām ir termins, kas palīdz cilvēkiem pievērst uzmanību tam, ka ne visa informācija, ne viss saturs, ko viņi ikdienā patērē, ne viss mēdīju saturs, ne viss sociālo mēdīju saturs, ne viss tas ir godīgs, ne viss tas ir godprātīgi radīts, un ka daļa no tā ir ļoti manipulatīva. Tāpēc, es domāju, cilvēku izpratnes veicināšanai, es domāju, termins dezinformācija joprojām, komunikācijas ziņā ir gan liederīgs. Profesionālā ziņā, Eiropas Ārējas darbības dienests nodaļa, kurā es strādāju, mēs ikdienā principā arī nelietojam terminu dezinformācija. Mēs vairāk koncentrējamies uz informācijas manipulāciju, uz iejaukšanos, jo tā lielā starpība ir, kāpēc bija šī izpratnes maiņa, un mēs arvien vairāk ejam prom no dezinformācijas, jo dezinformācija ir radījusi tādu iespēju, ka tā ir nepatiesa informācija. Un mēs negribētu likt šo vienādības zīmi starp nepatiesa informācija un dezinformācija. Dezinformācija, jeb informācijas manipulācija, varbūt arī patiesa informācija, kas tiek pasniegta ārpus konteksta, kas tiek atsevišķi elementi, varbūt tiek uzsvērti vairāk nekā citi, kas tiek mākslīgi pastiprināta, lai radītu priekšstatu, ka kāds notikums vai jautājums ir sensacionāls vai svarīgāks. Nevienmēr ir jābūt šim nepatiesības elementam, lai manipulētu ar informāciju. Tas ir tas, kā mēs un kā es personīgi izprotu dezinformāciju un kāpēc, manuprāt, tā ir ļoti liela problēma. Tas nav par to, ka cilvēki tic vai netic meliem. Tas ir par to, kā informācijas vide, kurā mēs visi dzīvojam, un tas saturs, ko mēs patērējam, kā mums nezinot, šis te var tikt manipulēts, lai novestu mūs pie viedokļu maiņas, lai novestu mūs pieņemt vai nepieņemt attiecīgus lēmumus, vai tas ir jautājums par vakcināciju, vai tas ir jautājums vēlēšanu kontekstā, par kuru partiju mēs balsosim vai nebalsosim, kuri politiķi mums patīk vai nepatīk. Ja? Un līdz ar to man dezinformācija nav komunikācijas jautājums, man dezinformācija ir drošības jautājums, tas ir sabiedrības saliedētības jautājums, tas ir jautājums par sociālo konstruktu starp valdību un iedzīvotājiem, un tāpēc mēs par šo te domājam kā par drošības izaicinājumu. Nevis kā tīra komunikācija.
Tu esi eksperts, drošības eksperts, arī komunikācijas eksperts. Noteikti brauc gan uz vienām, gan otru veidu konferencēm un pasākumiem, kur šiem jautājumiem pievēršas. Kas ir tavuprāt, un tu plus vēl ikdienā tu monitorē to informatīvo telpu ļoti plaši, kas tavuprāt ir kaut kāda viens aspekts, ko tev vajadzētu nosaukt, izdalīt, par ko mēs runājam pārāk maz vai nezinām, vai dezinformācijas kontekstā? Kas ir kāda viena lieta, ko mums vajadzētu visiem noteikti zināt?
Manuprāt, tā viena lieta, par ko vajadzētu runāt vairāk, arī šādu konferenču laikā. Manuprāt, mēs kaut kā esam salikuši, es nezinu īsti kāpēc, bet kopā dezinformācija tā ir lieta, kas notiek digitālā vidē. Ja, un mēs, man liekas, nerunājam pietiekami daudz, ka ļoti daudz informācijas manipulācijas notiek fiziski, notiek cilvēku savstarpējā saskarsmē. Nevis tikai tam, ko mēs lasām Twitterī vai Facebookā, ko mēs redzam TikTokā, ko mēs lasām Telegramā. Ļoti daudz šī informācijas manipulācija dienas beigās cilvēks jau netic ziņām. Cilvēks tic cilvēkam. Un nav tas avots, tas sociālajie mēdīji, mēs runājam ļoti daudz par to. Platformām ir jābūt atbildīgākam, ir jārada risinājumi, lai šī dezinformācija nenonāk pie cilvēkiem. Jā. Bet ir vairāk uzmanība, man liekas, jāpievērš arī šim sabiedrības savstarpējās uzticības atjaunošanai. Un tas, manuprāt, arī ir daļa no informācijas manipulācijas. Šī gadījumā jau sekas informācijas manipulācijai. Un par to, manuprāt, būtu jārunā vairāk arī šādā kontekstā, kur ir profesionāļi, kas ikdienā strādā ar dezinformācijas, jeb informācijas manipulācijas analīzi, izpratni, novērošanu, saprast, kuri tad ir tie sliktie spēlētāji šajā lauciņā un ko mēs varam darīt, lai sevi no tā pasargātu. Un šis fiziskās vides elements, manuprāt, ļoti bieži iztrūkst.
Es tev ievadā teicu, ka mums te konferencē ir 500 pārdalībnieku no dažādākajiem, kā saka, latvijas backgroundiem, arodiem. Tas lomu dalījums, tavuprāt, lai mēs visi iet uz kaut kādu tādu drošāku, labāku informatīvo telpu, ja tāda vispār ir iespējama. Kā tu redzi to lomu sadalījumu, kas būtu jādara valdībām, kas būtu jādara platformām, kas būtu jādara mēdījiem, kur tajā visā tavs darbs, starptautisko institūciju darbs ierakstās visā?
Tas varbūt nolākšu divas lielas atsevišķas lietas. Viens ir, šī ko es jau runāju par sabiedrības uzticēšanās atjaunošana. Tas varbūt ir vairāk darbs, kas ir jādara valdībām un institūcijām, bet tas ir jādara arī mēdījiem. Mēs runājam godīgi arī, pēdējos varbūt 10 gadus laikā arī žurnālistikas standarti ir smagi cietuši. Kuram ir pieeja YouTube un TikTokam, ir kļuvusi par žurnālistu potenciāli. Protams, žurnālistika ir ļoti smags un sarežģīts arots un ir nepieciešams laiks un standarti. Manuprāt, tas ir uzticēšanās veicināšana šī sadaļa. Manuprāt, tā īstenībā tā loma, kas jāspēlē valdībām un sevišķi organizācijām kā Eiropas Savienība, kā NATO. Starp citu, kā es runāju, šis ir drošības izaicinājums, līdz ar to arī Ziemeļatlantijas aliansei ir nozīmīga loma šeit. Mums ir godīgi jāatzīst, ka ne visi dalībnieki šajā informācijas vidē ir godīgi spēlētāji, ka mums ir atsevišķi apdraudējumu radoši aktori, latviski sakot, un šeit es varu pilnīgi godīgi teikt, pirmkārt un galvenokārt mēs redzam, ka tā ir Krievija, arī Ķīnas komunistiskā partija, ir arī gan liels apdraudējums no Irānas, no citiem spēlētājiem, un manuprāt, šī ir tā loma, ko nevar atstāt uz mēdīju pratību, uz sabiedrību, uz žurnālistiem. Šis drošības apdraudējums ir jāstiprina mūsu kolektīvā drošība, mūsu visaptvarošā drošība. Jāsaprot, ka šis ir drošības jautājums, un tas ir jārisina valdību līmenī, ne tikai atspēkojot un monitorēt, tas viss ir ļoti svarīgi, bet ko mēs darām, lai, teiksim, mazinātu Krievijas, Kremļa spējas izplatīt šos vēstījumus. Tas ir jautājums par ierobežojošiem mēriem, par sankcijām, kas būtu, manuprāt, daudz plašāk jāpiemēro. Gan tiem, kas izplata, gan tiem, kas uztur šo infrastruktūru. Ir, protams, atsevišķi gadījumi, kur arvien vairāk tieši Eiropas Savienības dalībvalstu valdības ir sapratuši. Tas nav tikai par to vēstījumu, ka tas ir nonācis līdz cilvēkiem. Jāskatās, no kurienes ir šīs naudas plūsmas, kuras firmas uztur serverus, kas rada viņiem šo grafisko dizainu šīm mājaslapām. Ir vesela ķēde cilvēku un firmu, kas ir iesaistīti, lai nodrošinātu šo Kremļa infrastruktūru, kas nav tikai par to cilvēku, par Simonjanu un Solovjovu un Kiseļovu, ko mēs redzam svētdienas vakarā Krievijas televīzijas ekrānos. Vairs neredzam Latvijā, tas, protams, ir ļoti labi, ka mēs viņus vairs neredzam, bet, diemžēl, apkārt pasaulē mēs joprojām viņus redzam, viņi nekur nav pazuduši. Bet ir mums jādomā daudz konsekventāk par visu šo ķēdi un kā šo apdraudējumu radošo ķēdi mēs varam izjaukt. Kā to izdarīt ātrāk. Un, protams, tas ir viens no iemesliem, kāpēc Eiropas Ārējas darbības dienests jau gadus 4-5 strādā ne tikai pie dezinformācijas analīzes, narratīvu analīzes un atspēkošanas, bet tieši veicināt šo izpratni par to, kā šī, ko es saucu par Kremļa informācijas manipulācijas ekosistēmu, kā viņi ir uzbūvēti, kā viņi strādā, kā šie vēstījumi, kā šie dezinformācijas narratīvi līdz cilvēkiem nonāk. Un saprast, kas ir tie spēlētāji. Tie nav tikai mēdīju spēlētāji. Grūti Krievijas propagandisti saukt par mēdīju spēlētājiem, bet tā ir IT infrastruktūra, tie ir finansējuma līdzekļi, tas ir bankas. Līdz ar to mums būtu visaptvarošai pieejai arī šo apdraudējumu radošo sistēmu izjaukt. Un tas, protams, ir darbs valdībām. To nevar atstāt ne uz privāto sektoru, viņiem ir loma, ne uz cilvēkiem. Protams, cilvēkiem ir loma, mēdīju pratības stiprināšana, pilsoniskai sabiedrībai ļoti svarīga loma šo sabiedrības izturēt spēju, noturību celt. Bet dienas beigās celt noturību ir svarīgi, bet mums ir arī jāmazina šo apdraudējumu radošo aktoru spējas mūs ietekmēt.
Praktiskas lietas, mums ir viens biežs dezinformācijas narratīvs no Krievijas puses, ka Brisele kaut ko liek mums darīt. Un izrādās, te mums ir tāds Uldis Elksnītis, kurš sēž tajā Briselē.
Un liek jums kaut ko darīt.
un strādā ikdienā. Pastāsti kaut kādi praktisks piemērs, kas ir tavu projekti, kampaņa, darbs, kaut kas ir tas, kas ir tagad, ar ko gribētu palapoties īpaši?
Ko mēs gribētu īpaši palapoties? Īstenībā es teiktu, nav tā, ka mēs strādātu pie kaut kā, kas būtu liels un jauns un spožs un šī sudraba lode, kas visas problēmas atrisinās. Kā es īstenībā gribētu palapoties pie tā, ka mēs pēdējos 10 gadus, kopš 2015. gada, tūlīt būs 10 gadi, nākamā gada martā, esam konsekventi strādājuši pie tā, lai veicinātu izpratni par to, ka dezinformācija nav fenomens, kuram nav autora, ka tā aiz kāds stāv, ka aiz stāv ļoti bieži stāv Kremlis. Ka tas nenotiek netīšām, ka tas ir apdraudējums, kas tiek sistemātiski radīts, ka tas nav apdraudējums, kas tiek mērķēts tikai uz Latviju vai Baltijas valstīm, uz Poliju vai uz Centrālu Eiropu, ka tiešām nav ģeogrāfiski tvērumi, ka tas ietekmē mūs visus. Es teiktu, un viens no projektiem, ko mēs jau gandrīz 10 gadus turpinām uzturēt, ir šī EU versus dezinfo platforma, jeb Eiropas Savienība pret dezinformāciju, kas, protams, sākās kā narratīva analīzes un pat teikt, atspēkošanas šāds rīks. Tīri, lai veicinātu izpratni par to, ka dezinformācija ir drošības apdraudējums. Un manuprāt, ir ļoti svarīgi arī meklējot jaunas iniciatīvas, turpināt šo es parasti salīdzinu šo noturības celšanu un cīņa dezinformācija, tas ir kā iešana uz sporta zāli. Ja mēs, teiksim, jaunībā varēja neiet uz sporta zāli, un bija 6-paku uz vēdera, un viss bija kārtībā, un mierīgi varēja pusmaratonu noskriet, un mēs bijām ļoti labā fiziskā formā. Bet, ja mēs neturpinam uzturēt savu labā fiziskā formā, kas notiek? Puncis izauga. Nu, lūk, un tas pats notiek, ja mēs neturpinam šo ikdienas darbu. Un tāpēc man ļoti gribētos uzsvērt, ka tieši tas ikdienas darbs pie šīs analīzes, pie apkopošanas, pie saprast, kur ir šie aktori. Un, teiksim, tas, ko mēs ikdienā darām, mēs arī visu šo arhivējam. Mums ir datubāze, lielākā publiskā pieejamā Kremļa narratīvu datubāze mūsu EU versus dezinfo platformā. Gandrīz 18,000 gadījumu, kur mēs esam saglabājuši, arhivējuši, kuros avotos, kādās valodās, kas ir šie narratīvi. Un ļoti svarīgi, mēs piedāvājam arī visiem pieejamu ne tikai, teiksim, faktos balstīt atspēkojumu, bet arī šo analīzi, kāpēc tas tiek darīts, ar kādiem mērķiem. Ļoti svarīgi saprast, šis nav, lai mūs par kaut ko pārliecinātu. Tas ir dezinformācija, ir Krievijas ārpolitikas rīks, lai panāktu savus strateģiskos ārpolitikas mērķus. Viens no tiem, protams, ir graut Eiroatlantisko stabilitāti, graut Eiropas Savienības vienotību.
Pats pēdējais jautājums, bet zinu, ka tas tāds risks, viņš veselam paneļu diskusijai noteikti šeit konferencē, bet tā pavisam īsā atbilde. Mākslīgais intelekts un dezinformācija, vairāk jūs liecies uz to risku pusi vai uz to iespēju pusi, ko tas dos jums pretoties dezinformācijai?
Es viennozīmīgi liecos uz šo pozitīvo pusi. Un manuprāt, teiksim, šī informācijas lauciņā tā līdzinājā situācija, protams, ir bijusi tāda, ka lielajiem spēlētājiem ir liela priekšrocība. Jo viņi ir lieli, viņiem ir resursi, viņiem ir cilvēku resursi, viņiem ir finansiāls resursi. Un, manuprāt, šis mākslīgais intelekts šo apgriež pilnīgi kājām gaisā un rada iespējas daudz mazākiem spēlētājiem iegūt daudz lielāku ietekmi. Protams, arī ar to ir saistīti riski, bet, manuprāt, mums baidoties no riskiem nevajadzētu nonākt situācijā, ka mēs neizmantojam šīs iespējas. Manuprāt, tieši valstīm kā Latvija, kur mums ir izpratne par to, kādu apdraudējumu tas rada, šie mākslīgā intelekta rīki var radīt, var dot mums stipri lielākas priekšrocības, lai šo savu pieredzi un zināšanas izmantot daudz plašākā mērogā, lai sasniegtu plašākas auditorijas, lai strādātu ātrāk, operatīvāk, ar lielāko, varbūt nav pareizais vārds, bet ar lielāku ietekmi. Ja, mēs šo 2 dienu laikā gan daudz esam dzirdējuši par mākslīgā intelekta spējām mainīt cilvēku prātus, tā skaitā, teiksim, sazvērestības teoriju atspēkošanas kontekstā. Manuprāt, mums ir kolektīvi Latvijā ļoti liels zināšanu un izpratnes kopums par dezinformāciju tieši Krievijas kontekstā, es domāju, ne tikai. Un šis, manuprāt, mums rada ļoti lielisku iespēju šīs zināšanas nodot daudz plašākai pasaulē.
Jā, tas, ko angliski sauc par punching above the weight,
tieši
bet latviskais būtu mazs cīnīs gar lielu vezumu.
Tieši tā, un manuprāt, šis mums tiešām ļaus to vezumu gāzt. Un no tā nevajadzētu baidīties.
Paldies tev par sarunu un cerams uz drīz tikšanos atkal Rīgā vai Briselē vai citviet. Paldies, Uldi.
Vienmēr labi.
Vislabāk.